Andrew Jackson, born March 15, 1767, Waxhaws region, South Carolina, U.S. died June 8, 1845, the Hermitage, near Nashville, Tennessee, U.S., was a military hero and the 7th President of the United States, 1829–37. He was the first U.S. President to come from the area west of the Appalachians and the first to gain office by a direct appeal to the mass of voters. His political movement has since been known as Jacksonian Democracy. Andrew Jackson was an American lawyer, planter, general, and statesman who served as the 7th President of the United States from 1829 to 1837. Before his presidency, he gained fame as a general in the U.S. Army and served in both houses of the U.S. Congress. Often praised as an advocate for ordinary Americans and for his work in preserving the Union of States, Jackson has also been criticized for his racial policies, particularly his treatment of Native Americans. Jackson was born in the colonial Carolinas before the American Revolutionary War. He became a frontier lawyer and married Rachel Donaldson Roberts. He briefly served in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, representing Tennessee. After resigning, he served as a justice on the Tennessee Superior Court from 1798 until 1804. Jackson purchased a property later known as the Hermitage, becoming a wealthy planter who owned hundreds of African American slaves during his lifetime. In 1801, he was appointed colonel of the Tennessee militia and was elected its commander. He led troops during the Creek War of 1813 to 1814, winning the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and negotiating the Treaty of Fort Jackson that required the indigenous Creek population to surrender vast tracts of present-day Alabama and Georgia. In the concurrent war against the British, Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 made him a national hero. He later commanded U.S. forces in the First Seminole War, which led to the annexation of Florida from Spain. Jackson briefly served as Florida's first territorial governor before returning to the Senate. He ran for president in 1824. He won a plurality of the popular and electoral vote, but no candidate won the electoral majority. With the help of Henry Clay, the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams in a contingent election. Jackson's supporters alleged that there was a corrupt bargain between Adams and Clay and began creating their own political organization that would eventually become the Democratic Party. Jackson ran again in 1828, defeating Adams in a landslide. In 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act. This act, which has been described as ethnic cleansing, displaced tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homelands east of the Mississippi and resulted in thousands of deaths. Jackson faced a challenge to the integrity of the federal union when South Carolina threatened to nullify a high protective tariff set by the federal government. He threatened the use of military force to enforce the tariff, but the crisis was defused when it was amended. In 1832, he vetoed a bill by Congress to reauthorize the Second Bank of the United States, arguing that it was a corrupt institution. After a lengthy struggle, the bank was dismantled. In 1835, Jackson became the only president to pay off the national debt. He survived the first assassination attempt on a sitting president. In one of his final presidential acts, he recognized the Republic of Texas. After leaving office, Jackson supported the presidencies of Martin Van Buren and James K. Polk, as well as the annexation of Texas. Jackson's legacy remains controversial, and opinions are frequently polarized. Supporters characterize him as a defender of democracy and the Constitution, while critics point to his reputation as a demagogue who ignored the law when it suited him. Jackson's presidency has consistently been ranked as above average, although his reputation has declined since the late 20th century. Andrew Jackson was the 7th President of the United States from 1829 to 1837, seeking to act as the direct representative of the common man. More nearly than any of his predecessors, Andrew Jackson was elected by popular vote. As president, he sought to act as the direct representative of the common man. Born in a backwoods settlement in the Carolinas in 1767, he received sporadic education. but in his late teens he read law for about 2 years, and he became an outstanding young lawyer in Tennessee. Fiercely jealous of his honor, he engaged in brawls, and in a duel killed a man who cast an unjustified slur on his wife Rachel. Jackson prospered sufficiently to buy slaves and to build a mansion, the Hermitage, near Nashville. He was the first man elected from Tennessee to the House of Representatives, and he served briefly in the Senate. A major general in the War of 1812, Jackson became a national hero when he defeated the British at New Orleans. In 1824 some state political factions rallied around Jackson. By 1828 enough had joined Old Hickory to win numerous state elections and control of the federal administration in Washington. In his first annual message to Congress, Jackson recommended eliminating the Electoral College. He also tried to democratize federal office holding. Already state machines were being built on patronage, and a New York senator openly proclaimed that to the victors belong the spoils. Jackson took a milder view. Decrying office holders who seemed to enjoy life tenure, he believed government duties could be so plain and simple that offices should rotate among deserving applicants. As national politics polarized around Jackson and his opposition, two parties grew out of the old Republican Party, the Democratic Republicans, or Democrats, adhering to Jackson, and the National Republicans, or Whigs, opposing him. Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and other Whig leaders proclaimed themselves defenders of popular liberties against the usurpation of Jackson. Hostile cartoonists portrayed him as King Andrew I. Behind their accusations lay the fact that Jackson, unlike previous presidents, did not defer to Congress in policy making but used his power of the veto and his party leadership to assume command. The greatest party battle centered around the Second Bank of the United States, a private corporation but virtually a government-sponsored monopoly. When Jackson appeared hostile toward it, the bank threw its power against him. Clay and Webster, who had acted as attorneys for the bank, led the fight for its wretched ardor in Congress. The bank, Jackson told Martin Van Buren, is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. Jackson, in vetoing the wretched ardor bill, charged the bank with undue economic privilege. His views won approval from the American electorate. In 1832 he polled more than 56% of the popular vote and almost 5 times as many electoral votes as Clay. Jackson met head-on the challenge of John C. Calhoun, leader of forces trying to rid themselves of a high protective tariff. When South Carolina undertook to nullify the tariff, Jackson ordered armed forces to Charleston and privately threatened to hang Calhoun. Violence seemed imminent until Clay negotiated a compromise, tariffs were lowered and South Carolina dropped nullification. In January of 1832, while the president was dining with friends at the White House, someone whispered to him that the Senate had rejected the nomination of Martin Van Buren as minister to England. Jackson jumped to his feet and exclaimed, "By the Eternal! I'll smash them!" So he did. His favorite, Van Buren, became vice president, and succeeded to the presidency when Old Hickory retired to the Hermitage, where he died in June 1845. Jackson's presidency ended on March 4, 1837. Jackson left Washington, D.C., 3 days later, retiring to the Hermitage in Nashville, where he remained influential in national and state politics. To reduce the inflation caused by the Panic of 1837, Jackson supported an independent treasury system that would restrict the government from printing paper money and require it to hold its money in silver and gold. During the 1840 presidential election, Jackson campaigned for Van Buren in Tennessee, but Van Buren had become unpopular during the continuing Depression. The Whig Party nominee, William Henry Harrison, won the election using a campaign style similar to that of the Democrats. Van Buren was depicted as an uncaring aristocrat, while Harrison's war record was glorified, and he was portrayed as a man of the people. Harrison won the 1840 election and the Whigs captured majorities in both houses of Congress, but Harrison died a month into his term, and was replaced by his vice president, former Democrat John Tyler. Jackson was encouraged because Tyler was not bound to party loyalties and praised him when he vetoed two Whig-sponsored bills to establish a new national bank in 1841. Jackson lobbied for the annexation of Texas. He was concerned that the British could use it as a base to threaten the United States and insisted that it was part of the Louisiana Purchase. Tyler signed a treaty of annexation in April 1844, but it became associated with the expansion of slavery and was not ratified. Van Buren, who had been Jackson's preferred candidate for the Democratic Party in the 1844 presidential election, had opposed annexation. Disappointed by Van Buren, Jackson convinced fellow Tennessean James K. Polk, who was then set to be Van Buren's running mate, to run as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee instead. Polk defeated Van Buren for the nomination and won the general election against Jackson's old enemy, Henry Clay. Meanwhile, the Senate passed a bill to annex Texas, and it was signed on March 1, 1845. Jackson died of dropsy, tuberculosis, and heart failure at 78 years of age on June 8, 1845. He was surrounded by family, enslaved persons, and friends at his deathbed, and he was recorded to have said, "Do not cry, I hope to meet you all in heaven, yes, all in heaven, white and black." He was buried in the same tomb as his wife Rachel. Jackson and Rachel had no children together but adopted Andrew Jackson Jr., the son of Rachel's deceased brother Severn Donaldson. The Jacksons acted as guardians for Donaldson's other children, John Samuel, Daniel Smith, and Andrew Jackson. They were also guardians for Andrew Jackson Hutchings, Rachel's orphaned grandnephew, and the orphaned children of a friend, Edward Butler, Caroline, Eliza, Edward, and Anthony, who lived with the Jacksons after their father died. Jackson also had 3 Creek children living with them: Lincoya, a Creek orphan Jackson had adopted after the Battle of Tallushatchee, and 2 boys they called Theodore and Charlie. For the only time in U.S. history, 2 women acted simultaneously as unofficial First Lady for the widower Jackson. Rachel's niece Emily Donaldson was married to Andrew Jackson Donaldson, who acted as Jackson's private secretary, and served as hostess at the White House. The president and Emily became estranged for over a year during the Petticoat Affair, but they eventually reconciled and she resumed her duties as White House hostess. Sarah York Jackson, the wife of Andrew Jackson Jr., became co-hostess of the White House in 1834, and took over all hostess duties after Emily died from tuberculosis in 1836. Jackson had a reputation for being short-tempered and violent, which terrified his opponents. He was able to use his temper strategically to accomplish what he wanted. He could keep it in check when necessary. His behavior was friendly and urbane when he went to Washington as senator during the campaign leading up to the 1824 election. According to Van Buren, he remained calm in times of difficulty and made his decisions deliberatively. He had the tendency to take things personally. If someone crossed him, he would often become obsessed with crushing them. For example, on the last day of his presidency, Jackson declared he had only 2 regrets: that he had not hanged Henry Clay or shot John C. Calhoun. He also had a strong sense of loyalty. He considered threats to his friends as threats to himself, but he demanded unquestioning loyalty in return. Jackson was self-confident, without projecting a sense of self-importance. This self-confidence gave him the ability to persevere in the face of adversity. Once he decided on a plan of action, he would adhere to it. His reputation for being both quick-tempered and confident worked to his advantage. It misled opponents to see him as simple and direct, leading them to often underestimate his political shrewdness. In 1838, Jackson became an official member of the First Presbyterian Church in Nashville. Both his mother and his wife had been devout Presbyterians all their lives, but Jackson stated that he had postponed officially entering the church until after his retirement to avoid accusations that he had done so for political reasons. Jackson's legacy is controversial and polarizing. His contemporary, Alexis de Tocqueville, depicted him as the spokesperson of the majority and their passions. He has been variously described as a frontiersman personifying the independence of the American West, a slave-owning member of the Southern gentry, and a populist who promoted faith in the wisdom of the ordinary citizen. He has been represented as a statesman who substantially advanced the spirit of democracy and upheld the foundations of American constitutionalism, as well as an autocratic demagogue who crushed political opposition and trampled the law. In the 1920s, Jackson's rise to power became associated with the idea of the common man. This idea defined the age as a populist rejection of social elites and a vindication of every person's value independent of class and status. Jackson was seen as its personification, an individual free of societal constraints who can achieve great things. In 1945, Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr.'s influential Age of Jackson redefined Jackson's legacy through the lens of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, describing the common man as a member of the working class struggling against exploitation by business concerns. In the 21st century, Jackson's Indian Removal Act has been described as ethnic cleansing, the use of force, terror, and violence to make an area ethnically homogeneous. To achieve the goal of separating Native Americans from the whites, coercive force such as threats and bribes were used to effect removal, and unauthorized military force was used when there was resistance, as in the case of the Second Seminole War. The act has been discussed in the context of genocide, and its role in the long-term destruction of Native American societies and their cultures continues to be debated. Jackson's legacy has been variously used by later presidents. Abraham Lincoln referenced Jackson's ideas when negotiating the challenges to the Union that he faced during 1861, including Jackson's understanding of the Constitution during the nullification crisis and the president's right to interpret the Constitution. Franklin D. Roosevelt used Jackson to redefine the Democratic Party, describing him as a defender of the exploited and downtrodden and as a fighter for social justice and human rights. Donald Trump used Jackson's legacy to present himself as the president of the common man, praising Jackson for saving the country from a rising aristocracy and protecting American workers with a tariff. In 2016, President Barack Obama's administration announced it was removing Jackson's portrait from the $20 bill and replacing it with one of Harriet Tubman. Though the plan was put on hold during Trump's presidency, President Joe Biden's administration resumed it in 2021. Jackson is usually rated highly as a president, but his reputation began to decline in the 1960s. His contradictory legacy is shown in opinion polls. A 2014 survey of political scientists rated Jackson as the 9th highest rated president but the 3rd most polarizing. He was also ranked the 3rd most overrated president. In a C-SPAN poll of historians, Jackson was ranked the 13th in 2009, 18th in 2017, and 22nd in 2021. Thank you for watching this video.